Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome to our series playing d4. So in this series, we're covering some very nice lines from white perspective while playing the first move, of course, d4. And today we're analyzing our game against the so-called Stonewall Dutch. And if you're familiar maybe with my YouTube chess channel more, I've started this London system series in which you have maybe a good preparation while playing as white. But I'm not recommending you that this London system should be really the only opening that you play. You should also have sometimes a backup plan. You should choose two openings. For instance, when we play as white for the first move d4, you can maybe try out the London system, but sometimes your opponent can prepare against you. So I think you should always have a B plan, how to beat particular opening lines. And that's how you should also prepare as black. You should always find two responses. For instance, if you play as black against e4, you can maybe play the Sicilian, and maybe you can play e5, the common Rui Lopez or the Italian game. So you should always have at least two responses against your opponent's particular opening lines, opening preparations, in order to be flexible in your chess game, because I think we to have at least two opening lines that we can prepare. And as I said, you can study maybe the London system against the Dutch defense setup, but I decided to show you now my secret weapon, how to play against the Dutch, and I think I had great success. I managed to beat the famous Agat Mater in one particular tournament game in this particular setup that I wanted to show you today. And today I decided to show one of my games how to beat really the Dutch defense with the knight to h3 setup. This is a very interesting line. It may appeal to you that it's really weird decision to place the knight on the edge of the board, where it's not belonging. Simply the knight on the edge of the board is simply not good. But there is one positional idea about this setup, and Garry Kasparov played this line, Vishy Anand played this line, I think, so we can use it too. And especially when I watched Garry Kasparov's game, that's where I started to study this opening more and more, and really try to have a decent preparation against the Dutch. So let's check out now what's all about. If you can see the thumbnail, we have Luka Modric, my landsman from Croatia, the FIFA World Player in football of 2018. He is storming towards the best defenders, the best Dutch defenders, maybe Virgil van Dijk and also Jaap Stam. I'm really also a football fan. I really love to watch football too, so these are really the best defenders, and Luka is trying to pass through. So okay, let's check out now this knight to h3 idea. It's, I think, a very cool idea to beat the Dutch. So d4. Here our opponent plays the move f5, the Dutch. We play the move g3, and we have now e6. So my recommendation is now to play after the move to g3, here bishop to g2, and here our opponent can maybe play the move knight to f6. Now we want to play here c4. c4, I think, is very important because our opponent can proceed with the normal Dutch idea, d5. Today we're analyzing this particular line. And now comes, I think, the first tricky part of this particular opening. It's the move knight to d2. What we don't want to do is to play with our knight from g1. So we don't want to play knight to f3 immediately, or we don't want to expose ourselves immediately with the move knight to h3. We're delaying the situation, we're still protecting our c4 pawn. If d takes c4 happens, knight to c4, and then we could again occupy the weak e5 square. So that's why black will probably delay the situation and will play this Stonewall setup, this really compact position on light squares. But whenever you see that black is building his light square complex all over the board, when we places too many pawns on the same colored squares, it's obvious that also he leaves some weaknesses behind. There are several dark square problems tend to face in the continuation of the game. So one of the main positional ideas is to get rid of the key defender of dark squares. It's of course a dark square bishop. So one of our main positional ideas is to get rid of the bishop on c1 and maybe trade it off for the bishop on f8. So how to do that? After the move queen to c2, we're delaying again a little bit the situation. We're not exposing ourselves. We don't want to play knight to f3 or knight to h3 immediately. We're waiting, and now when the move bishop to d6 comes, now comes our tricky part of this opening, knight to h3. Okay, in one of my games, my opponent tried kingside castling. I played also kingside castling. Here, knight to e4. One of the main ideas of the Stonewall Dutch is this knight to outpost on on e4. This is very tricky, and what black is relying simply on in this, of course, this long diagonal, and also this very powerful outposted knight on e4. But here I recommend you don't take the knight. It's very tricky because after f takes e4, you see black has now a space advantage, and black can maybe crack the position with the move e5 and also get another knight, maybe here knight to d7, knight to f6, and still have a good opening preparation. Still, I think this is a firm pawn structure, although these are double pawns, but you will have troubles with the move f3 to break this pawn structure because it's really a weird position already. You shouldn't, as I said, trade off the knights. Our best idea here is to simply proceed with knight to f3. And what we can notice about this move knight to f3, it's a very important one. It controls also the very important g5 square. In some occasions, you'll see that the Dutch defense player will try a g5. F4, maybe even G4 pawn breakthrough motif. So far it's not possible because we are controlling the G5 square with two knights and the bishop. So that's why here my opponent tried knight to D7, and now comes this idea bishop to F4. That's why this move knight to H3 is very important. We want to trade off the bishops without doubling up the pawn structure. If bishop to f4 happens, we have knight to f4, and you see now from this square we can remaneuver the knight to d3, and we have now the powerful control of the e5 square. As I said, we got rid of the key defender of dark squares, which were the dark square bishop. Now we can simply try to occupy the weak e5 square. It's a very important and pragmatic idea to play against the Dutch defense. We can notice that our light square bishop is perfectly fine. It still has a good activity. On the other hand, this light square bishop of blacks is simply a weak one. So that's what I meant. When you play too many pawn moves on the same colored squares, you leave also spaces behind. And when we manage maybe to play something like knight to d3, knight to e5, this outposted knight on e5 cannot be kicked away by any pawns because black has advanced already the f5 pawn, but also the d5 pawn. So no attacking possibilities against its potential outposted knight. So I think it's a really cool line. Bishop to f4. In the game, my opponent tried bishop to e7, and I tried now c5 to lock really the positional light squares. Here my opponent tried h6, I tried knight to e5, we have g5, knight to d7, here bishop to d7, and again we're occupying the weak e5 square. In the game, my opponent tried bishop to f6, we have bishop to f6. Here I made a basically mistake. It was a blitz game, but I wanted to show you first these common ideas, and then in continuation of the series how to play against the Dutch, we'll see also some top grandmaster games, for instance like Garry Kasparov, also by Vishy Anand, how they played really this great line with the move knight to h3. A better idea here is f3. I missed this because here after d takes e5, the knight is trapped. That's the main issue. You see the knight doesn't have good squares on the board, so it's, I think, a bad game here for black. But okay, still after the move bishop to f6, I think I have a decent game. Again, I tried f4, really cement the position on dark squares. I want to lock out this light square bishop where it doesn't have good activities, and here black's idea in some occasions can be really this maneuver of the bishop, bishop to d7, bishop to e8, and then bishop to h5 to remaneuver the bishop to another diagonal where at least it has some kind of an activity. After the move f4, my opponent tried g4, knight to f2, here king to g7, and now e3, simply again keeping the position compact on dark squares. Here my opponent tried h5, and now knight to d3. We want to occupy finally again the weak e5 square. So in the game, bishop to e8, knight to e5, king to g8, and now we want to get use of our space advantage on the queen side because we have now an advanced pawn on c5. Now it's time to play something like rook to b1, maybe a4, and then followed with b5, really breaking the position on the queen side. Here my opponent tried knight to d7. I retreated with the knight to d3 because I don't want to trade off the my good knight for a bad knight, because if my opponent would have played something like here knight to e4, I would immediately take out the knight. After something like f takes e4, I hope you realize this bishop is simply a part of the pawn chain. There are simply too many pawns on light squares, and this bishop will never find a way into the game. You can maybe try the move h4, but the only threat I think that I have is maybe on the h file, and I think I can compete with something like rook to f2, so I don't have problems on the h file. But this bishop is really bad, and we can proceed with our normal idea to get this a4 b5 pawn breakthrough. So in the game, After the move knight to d7, as I said, I played knight to d3. My opponent tried h4, and now rook to b1. Simply remaneuver all over my pieces to the queen side, where we finally are searching our b5 pawn breakthrough. But this move rook to from f to b1 is very important, because there is also this threat. If I would have played maybe something like rook to b1 from a to b1, then you get h3, and you see I don't have good squares for my bishop, and this bishop has to play then on h1, and then the bishop is locked. If after rook to from f to b1, if now h3 happens, it's basically helping me out, because I will remaneuver my bishop to f1, where I still have a good power and powerful control of the b5. So a4 b5 would be then the pawn breakthrough motif again. So in the game, king to f7 was played. I tried a4, rook to h8, now b5, finally getting my pawn breakthrough. Queen to f6, now a5. What we want to do is, even in some occasions, to sacrifice the pawns if necessary, but just in order to open the position. In the game, we have a6, b takes c6, b takes c6, and now rook to b7, getting use of the b file. Here I think I have already a very pleasant game. In the game, queen to h6 was played, and now knight to e5. First the check, king to e7 was played, but now knight to c6, and again knight to e5. I don't think I have troubles here, because I have defended here. If now something like h takes g3 happens, okay, h takes g3 can be played, queen to h2, but again I can simply hide here with my king, and now after something like here knight to f6, I can play rook to h1. If maybe queen to knight to e4 happens, then I can even sacrifice the queen and maybe take out. Although maybe I'm down the exchange, but now c6, c7, and c8 is really a very nice threat. I think I have again some good possibilities. Knight to c4, knight to d6 is also playable. So I think although black is up the exchange, but I have a really good game here with this pass pawn on the c file. So in the game, my opponent tried knight to f6. Here I played king to f2, simply getting my king out of the range of the attack. In the game, knight to h5, my opponent attacks here very nicely, and now I played rook to h1. Again, I'm at least competing here on the h file with my rook. The rook is supported by the bishop on g2. If now h takes g3 happens here, I still think it's playable. Again, h takes g3, no tactical possibilities on the h file, because the rook is covering that. So in the game, after the move rook to h1, bishop to b5 was played, but now simply, as I said, getting use of my pass pawn, c6, knight to f6, we have queen to c5, the check, and now the fork. I simply took the rook, and now after queen to e7, here my opponent resigned. So okay, this wasn't the most accurate game, it's not the point about that, but you see, this was a blitz game, and you can find really almost the best moves without calculating so much, because you played on a simple idea. Let's go back to this critical moment of the opening. So we're playing the move here, very important here, knight to h3. We're waiting, then we play knight to after castling, let's see, castling, and then knight to f3, and then followed with bishop to f4. This is now our setup. As I said, we still have a good control of the e5 square, very important thing to notice. And now we should search for c5, b4, a4, b5 motifs. This is the main setup. As I said, from this point on, we'll analyze more and more games with some top grandmaster games. This was a game in which I played many inaccuracies, many mistakes. It's not the point about that, but I really felt good in this position, because I played against a strong FIDE master, and I outplayed him with a normal position idea to get rid of the key defenders of dark squares, which was of course the bishop on d6. So memorize really this line. I think you can really surprise your opponent if he plays the Stonewall Dutch. I'll show you also good and effective ways how to play against the Leningrad Dutch, but also in this normal Dutch with bishop to e7. We'll come to that part. We have covered, as I said, this play against the Dutch in my London system series, but as I said, we should really be flexible. We should have at least 2 or 3 sidelines which you can use in order to win games against particular openings. So Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game, and I hope that you realize these positional ideas, how to play against the Stonewall Dutch. If you want to know more about good opening lines while playing the first move d4, check out my d4 series. Here is the link. And if you have troubles maybe to play as black, check out my King's Indian and Nimzo Indian defense series. And as I said, I've started this London system series if you want to have another good preparation while playing as white. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and what to say, chess is the best, of course.